Our talk today is going to be about innovation, or the ugly reality of innovation in consumer goods. And the guest speaker is Costas. I will not venture to pronounce the family name. So I'll leave that to you, and I'll let you introduce yourself. Thank you very much, by the way, for accepting to do this. And I'm very much looking forward to this. So yeah,
Yeah,
the floor is all yours.
thank you, Mahmoud. Thank you, Mr. Decaf Quest, and thank you everyone else for joining. My name is indeed quite complicated and long, Costas Papaikonomou. I am half Greek, half Dutch. I live in the Netherlands, and I'll be introducing, let's say, my professional side in a couple of slides in a moment. But to give you a few further headlines, I live in The Hague and I am married. I have two boys, one is 20, one is almost 17, and I've just turned 50. And of those 50 years, I spent 25 years working in innovation, which is a very big and broad term, which I'm going to explore a little bit with you, but it basically comes down to doing new things with business purpose. What I'll be sharing with you is indeed, it could be 45 minutes, could be a little longer, but it's effectively a combination of two types of, let's say, lectures I do. One is really when I'm keynote presenting in front of a business, which is sort of to tease them out of their normal thinking around how innovation works and makes it successful. And the other is when I do guest lectures at universities, which is a little friendlier and a little more sort of an introduction to the topic for people who are just about to embark on the journey. But yeah, I hope you like it. Just so you know, there will be a couple of slides in, probably after about, I don't know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I'll have a question for you. And if you happen to have pen and paper nearby, it would be really handy to just have that at hand. Look at that, Mr. Baker is completely prepared. So is Urtats. You guys are so old school, you have pen and paper nearby, but that's great. If not, don't worry. You'll get the point of the exercise anyway, even if you don't have pen and paper. So what I'll do is I'll share screen. I won't be able to see too much of what's going around or happening while I share screen, but please give me a nudge if something is wrong or I lose connection.
Unless there's something important that I need to share or read from the chats,
no.
Everything, don't mind anything, because it would be me just
Cool.
picking on Anne Albert and Suhad.
Cool. So just so you know, after this, it's basically it's of course it's a one-way presentation. That's the slides. I'll be sticking around as long as you want, if you want to continue the topic or whatever, because it might connect what you do to what you do in daily life. But yeah, here we go. So just sharing screen now. There we go. Let me go full screen so it's a little better to see. There we are. Participants can now see your application. Innovation in consumer goods. There we are. Let me just make you guys a little smaller on screen. It's the ugly reality edition for Decaf Quest. Guys, this is about doing new things. And I guess innovation is such a broad term. I came across this cartoon by a Danish cartoonist, or actually two cartoonists, about 15 years ago, and I still use it and put it on screen in situations like this because it so nicely captures what this is about. It's about doing something new, with a business purpose, and very importantly, pissing off competition. If there's one thing to take away from why would you innovate, it's to do exactly that. You have competitors, and you just want to make sure that they're terribly annoyed by what you do. So for this particular chat, about an hour, could be a bit shorter, but again, a few things about sort of who I am, and in particular what I've done, and I guess what I think success looks like when it comes to innovating and doing something that works. There are a couple of truths around the topic which I would love you to know, and hopefully you can, I guess, bring them into practice after this. And then I'll also dive into a little bit on why is this so hard. And I know it's hard because I've been doing this for a long time and I've made so tremendously many mistakes, been so stupid and naive, that I'm just trying to convey some of these things so you don't have to make the mistakes I made. So a quick few headlines about myself. I'm an engineer by trade, and my claim to fame is one of the founders of Happen, which was an innovation agency working with consumer goods companies across the planet. We sold the business in 2019, and since I've now left the business, I've been doing a few other things. Not entirely settled on what my next step will be, but it might have to do with venture capital, even though that's a little bit of a cesspool I've discovered. Might be having to do something with more creative work. We'll see. But a lot of what you'll be hearing in this basically call or in this presentation will be based on what I've done with my team between 2007 and 2019. And it's working for companies like the ones that are on screen across countless different categories. And I guess what is it, maybe a way to find sort of the parallels between these, because again, there are food companies on here, there are pharma companies on here, there are travel companies on here, there are so many different types of, let's say, categories being serviced, is when you look at that overview, and this is just a fraction of the, of course, of the products that we helped develop and brought to market, is what they all have in common is they serve very, very mature markets. And when, by a mature market, I mean a market that is fully developed. There's a lot of competition, and it's simply quite hard to do anything new. So if you're in laundry detergents and you have to spend a lot of money to develop a new product, you want to be sure it succeeds. But you also know whatever you launch is probably just going to be taking away existing market share from someone else. So it's very, very much sort of a zero-sum game by the time it becomes very mature. And again, it's so wide. I mean, even just looking at this slide now, I'm so surprised that we managed to, within one and the same company, work on chocolate, work on pasta, work on sex toys, work on telecom, cards, the works. It's all in there. And they all follow a certain pattern, which has to do with the fact that it's big markets where it's very hard to come up with anything people haven't seen before. To give you two very, very quick examples from the past, this is the product that got us started back in 2007, was our first success, which got us a lot of extra work through that same business, which was Reckitt Benckiser. You probably know the product. It's a stain remover. At the time, they only had the pink version. They came to us, listen, we flatlined. There's no more growth in pink. What do we do? Well, you can wonder, is this really rocket science? Well, not really. It's not hard, but for some reason, large organizations are just not very good at coming up with what is the right idea themselves. And for those of you who know consumer goods maybe a little bit, and particularly say brands like this, you would say, oh, this is all just marketing. It's all just sort of reframing and rethinking something that already exists. Well, that's not entirely true. And in fact, Reckitt Benckiser, and I'm using the old logo there on purpose because it's very much what was the case back then, was actually a very, very R&D driven business. I mean, yes, we did some research amongst just basically going into people's homes to see how they did their laundry, and very quickly noticed that actually when they use stain remover, they use as little as possible when they're doing their normal, say, regular colored wash. But as soon as they do the whitewash, which is once a week, they would just stack on as much, I mean, they would just literally pile on the detergent and the stain removers. We realized that actually that was a much more interesting area to play, but then bring that back to the business, effectively their R&D got to work, which is, okay, what's the molecule they're going to deliver that extra benefit with, that it becomes a perfect stain remover for white laundry? What's the molecule? What's the benefit really that it delivers? And then very important for a business like this, what's the demo? How are we going to explain this? Because if you cannot explain the benefit, there's no point in launching it. And that's maybe why sometimes marketing and innovation are confused. And very importantly in this case, and I'll say this a couple of times and explain then towards sort of 2/3 of the presentation why it's so important, it's again a powder, like the previous version was. Also, just one other case from the very, very early days that got us started, that got us thinking about what makes innovation work and how do you create products that succeed, working with Sanix, basically helping that team create the Zero platform, which effectively is very simple. It's understanding, what do people know the brand to be? So this is not about what you hope people will eventually think the brand is about. No, what do they already know it for being? Which is, of course, very much the case with most brands in consumer goods. And then also just understanding who's actually buying it and using it in particular. And in this case, the Sanix team were continuously misled because in their research, they saw it's the woman of the household who buys it. And they thought she was actually the person using it as well. And where in reality, it was being bought for the rest of the family, which just meant different things were important. And in this case, again, it's just another shower gel. It's not a weird format or anything like that. Now, in case any of the things I'm telling you in this presentation you find interesting, make sure to get one of the books that are available through grumpyinnovator.com on Gumroad. You can also buy them in physical form on Amazon. But yeah, that's kind of where I've sort of penned down everything I know about this topic. Now, to get into the meat of the subject, really what this is about. And on screen is a question which I actually almost always ask to either clients or anyone in front of me who is asking for help on this topic is, well, if you think innovation is the answer to your problem, then indeed, what is the problem? What was the question that requires doing something new? And you get a mix of answers that almost always there is an element of we want to disrupt. We have a particular product and market, and that market needs disruption. Now, why on earth, say, these large companies are hell-bent on disrupting their own markets is still a complete riddle for me, because it's the most stupid thing you can do. You want to leave your market as it is and make as much money as you can and go disrupt someone else's market. But if for some reason they don't think about that way, but that is definitely the case. Sometimes it's about just asking what consumers want. And you might know the famous story about, say, Mr. Ford, who said, well, if I'd asked people what they want, they would have just told me to get a faster horse. And of course, the solution was very, very different. And I've personally had a situation like this myself back in, I think, 1997 or 98, when a friend of mine gave me this, or showed me this, because this is what he had, an Ericsson T28 or T10, sorry, with a little keyboard. And I didn't even have a phone back then. And he was presenting this to me as in, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And I said, what on earth are you talking about? What a stupid idea. Yeah, so asking me what the solution would need to be would have also been pretty stupid. Another form of, let's say, what people call innovation is just making some updates. And of course, everyone on the call here is probably shrewd enough to realize that when people say they have a new recipe, it's probably a cheaper recipe. What does that mean? Is that really innovation? Is that really bring something new to the market? Well, maybe it is, because at least it's something to talk about. On the topic of doing something for less money, if you are specifically at work to save cost in your product, is that innovation? I thought originally that it was, to be honest. I've changed my mind a little when I actually asked myself a different question, which is what happens after you lose on price? Because if you say I'm innovating to lower the cost, it means I'm going to be fighting in the market based on the price. Well, then you will also every now and then lose on price. Well, what does that mean? And very few people actually think about it, but I can tell you what it means. It means when you lose on price, you're actually not losing on price, because it means the competitor you lost to has already managed to offer the same quality, or the quality the customer actually wants, and then realizes you're too expensive. So in a way, when you start losing on price, you lose on price and on quality at the same time, especially because the money you're now not making is going into someone else's pocket who will spend it on raising the quality. So I mean, one of the things that all this has in common, I guess, which is true in my, say, world or definition of what innovation really means, is it's about creating new revenue. So whatever you do in a business sense to create something new will cost money, and all you need to do is make sure more money comes out, incremental revenue, or even incremental profit in a way, because of course you would not innovate if the innovation itself that goes to market is then paying for the innovation. Now, all this so far is, of course, quite abstract. I can imagine. So you might be thinking, well, it's just about creating some new ideas and then putting them out into market and then hoping someone buys it. It's not exactly that simple. And I guess what I would just love to share with you is what I figured out, what we figured out, I should say, over the past few years of how this actually is done successful, and particularly say what's important. So if there is one thing to take from this whole presentation, it's this. It is that there is always a business reason to innovate. So it doesn't say here, just get a good idea. I'll tell you in a moment where good ideas fit. But what it is in essence is you make a business decision to do one of these three things. It's either to protect what you have, which effectively means to fend off competitors. It is to grow what you have, which effectively means to go into new places, new markets, to say consumers, could be anything, or it is to transform what you have because the old stuff is broken. Now, once you've agreed which of those three it's going to be, then what you need for that is really the same. You will have to find some kind of unmet consumer need, could be a frustration of some kind. And when you've spotted that, you need to get to a commercially viable solution, which means it's a solution you can afford to make and afford to give to those consumers. Now, of course, when you're just looking to protect your business, you need a much less dramatic solution there than you would when you want to grow your market, because that means bringing new people in rather than just keeping existing people happy. And transformation, of course, is more dramatic even than that. A nice visual for that I've used for a couple of years, it looks a little bit like one of those Scalextrics little car race games or the model train tracks, is what are the cycles you go through depending on what you want to achieve. And as you can see, the protect cycle is really short. You realize your portfolio of products isn't right. So you have a number of products in market, it's not working. You need to update that. So you develop a new proposition, create basically whatever change you need to do in the operations, which is, so this is like a new vanilla flavor for your food product, and you launch it. It's super easy. And it's a calendar basically that tells you to do this. And what is also very interesting is it's a portfolio management decision rather than a good idea that is driving the whole thing. When you're looking for something to grow your business, of course, it's much more complicated because you probably need to develop quite new products, which means getting R&D involved, means getting manufacturing sorted to be able to make it, maybe even involve creating a whole new sales channel. And transformation is even more difficult because, of course, that requires probably firing half the people you have on your team because their skills are antiquated, hiring new talent with new skills, say reorganizing, and then effectively creating a whole new market to develop or to sell whatever you've developed. And again, that's very, very dramatic thing to do. And it's only, say, if you were now in the business of making faxes or something like that, which is completely outdated and has almost no market anymore, you need to think about, okay, where's my future going to be? To give you a quick sort of flavor of what that looks like in practice with the product, actually I had a lot of fun working on. We did a lot of work with Cadbury over the years. And there was one particular project that stood out because it was about 300-gram chocolate bars, which are huge. They're like 1,200 calorie monsters. And one of the people on the Cadbury team had realized that actually it was the one product that, contrary to all of the others, even though they were strongly marketing it towards women, it was actually eaten by men. And not only that, it was eaten by men, usually on the couch at night instead of having beer and crisps. So very transformational insight, which required, they realized actually there's probably a very dramatic new type of product we can make for that because it's such a distinctly different audience from what they're used to. And again, before that, small bars and big bars were using exactly the same recipes. The only difference was the size. So we worked with them at the time. And I guess one of the angles we realized was, well, the mold is so big, you can put all kinds of huge ingredients in there, which you would never be able to do in a normal chocolate bar. That became a new platform, which I guess is the one sort of investment moment you have when you do some investment in your manufacturing, in your R&D, to just get basically off the ground with something which is a step, I guess in this way, sense, to the side of your normal operations, in this case, in tablet chocolate. Once you have that, which is the way you open that market for growth, then it's just a question of keeping that updated every year, launching 1 or 2 new flavors, new products. In this case, well, it was all about adding different types of nuts or biscuits, etc. Realizing also that if you put biscuit in, the product becomes cheaper and you make more margin. There's all kinds of business considerations coming in. But effectively, what you're doing is you're making sure that that new sort of source of money can be maintained over time by keeping everyone interested in what you're doing. And of course, you keep the ones everyone loves on shelf, and the ones that don't do well, you take off shelf. I guess what I'm saying in a way is businesses that innovate well find a certain rhythm. And it's different for, of course, the different categories that organizations might be servicing, because of course the rhythm for laundry detergents is different than for, say, chocolate. But it is a rhythm where they know that every now and then they need to do something big, and they just keep maintaining it with small changes. Now, what is funny, and this is maybe another very, very big learning I had, particularly in the early days, is what stops people from the ability to do this. And the analogy we found and that we used in Happen was that of the stationary escalator. And the way the analogy works is actually quite funny. It's when you're walking up to one, which is stationary. So imagine you're in a shopping mall or an airport or wherever, and you're literally looking at this. It's an escalator that isn't moving. It's actually scarier to get on than one that is moving. And you probably feel a little clunky and clumsy and robotic as you sort of work your way up a stationary escalator that is moving. And this is because your whole body is effectively programmed on how you should basically go up one of these. It's when it's moving. And that sense of being programmed and having expectations and assumptions on how it works is what happens to anyone working in a big corporation, working on laundry detergents, for example, or toothpaste every day of the week for years and years and years. They just assume they know how it works, and it becomes incredibly difficult for them to spot anything new. Now, warning, up next is my pen and paper exercise. So if you have pen and paper nearby, make sure a pen is in one hand and paper is in the other hand, because it's basically a little exercise to bring this to life a little bit. And the first question I'd like to ask you is, if you take your pen and paper, please draw a flower. And I'll give you about 10 seconds to do this. So don't make it too complicated. And let's just draw a flower. Okay, time's up. Mahmoud, did you manage to draw a flower? Very good. I can just about see it. And here's something I prepared earlier, because I guess when people draw flowers, they draw something that looks a hell of a lot like this, including the two leaves on the little branch, which is quite funny. Now, hilariously, if you would go, I mean, spring's coming, of course, in a few months. If you go out and look for flowers, almost none of them actually look like this. This is the cliche of a flower. And that's the problem businesses have. They have stereotypes in their head. They have cliches in their head. They think in assumptions of how the world around them works because it's worked for a long time. And what is really interesting, which is one of the reasons as an agency we're basically lucky, is in the past 10 years, all those cliches were falling apart, or 15 years, I should say. So many of the, let's say, rules and rules of thumb is probably a better way of putting it. The standard ways of approaching innovation challenges, whether how you define a consumer or where you look for your information or the regulation or even your competitive field, all those have been broken, basically. None are really the way they were up to very recently. And of course, all those rules people had in their head were probably quite wrong, but for some reason they held up because they worked. But these have collapsed. It's getting even more dramatic recently with like COVID coming in and basically their normal retail channels being shut, and then Ukraine and supply chain collapsing. All of these things changed the game, and they changed it quite dramatically. What has also now come back is this thing about sustainability also being very, very important. This is a particularly confusing one because the original approach to sustainability as an important topic for consumers was that if you show how green you are, you're probably going to stand out and make a difference and people will like you. I have a really fun example to show how that's not true, and it's true for probably everyone on this call as well, at least it's definitely true for me, is Nutella. So Nutella is it's probably invented by Satan, but actually invented by the Ferrero family, who are close to satanic. But the thing with Nutella is people have already known for a very, very long time it's full of sugar. 1/3 of this product is sugar. Yes, they put the glass of milk on and they talk about it in the ads, and people say, "Oh, nice, it has dairy." That's an excuse because they know it's full of sugar. It makes you really fat. Nevertheless, people continue to eat it in massive volumes. This is still a growing brand, believe it or not, after like 70 years. So people continue to eat it. They continue to eat more of it. They know it's bad for them because it makes them fat. The only thing it actually effectively does is makes them feel a little bit guilty. Now, the news from the past few years is people are starting to realize this, say, of the other 2/3, 1/3 is palm oil. Now, palm oil, that connection is now being made by most people. It means every sandwich with Nutella you eat is another orangutan going homeless, because their homes need to be chopped down to grow all that palm for palm oil. Now, has that affected the consumption of Nutella in any way? No, not at all, because people just feel a little more guilty while they put thick layers of Nutella on their bread. The thing is, people who cared about the sugar left pretty soon. People who cared about the palm oil left pretty soon, but that's like a tiny, tiny minority. If you're on LinkedIn, it seems like everyone cares about this, but a good rule of thumb in innovation is whatever is popular on LinkedIn is the opposite of what you should be doing. And this is another case. So what it also says is if you want to be more sustainable and sort of be better for the planet, as a producer, it's up to you because consumers won't care and they won't give you a dime of credit for doing anything. Now, overall, all these sort of changing of paradigms, etc., is I'll skip that one. It's basically just making the point again. But changing the paradigm in so many, many different ways in the world of how innovation used to work feels like chaos, I can say. And almost without exception, almost all the projects that we worked on, it was literally almost 2,000 of them over a period of 15 years across a significant team, of course. But there was always some level of panic to deal with. What effectively they had lost was the ability to deal with change in the environment. And here I do have to refer to our favorite, slightly overweight probabilist, Mr. Taleb, Because the term I came across a couple of years ago through one of his books had to do with this, because this is very much how all these large organizations literally feel. They know they're under threat all the time. And funnily enough, if you look at of course, I guess what I thought also was the opposite of this word would have taken me to things like robust, which for me, I guess a nice way of expressing that is it's like a lighthouse in a storm with the waves clashing up against it. And the thing is, it doesn't interact with the environment. What is so nice about being anti-fragile, it means you're welcoming the change in the environment. And just for fun's sake, let's look at what those two worlds look like when you compare some things that live in there. So on the fragile end, of course, it's stuff like glassware, 3-year plans, the European Union, all these kinds of things are fragile. I don't know if anyone on the call knows who the gentleman on the bottom right is there, but I guess not, even though in front of an audience of about 500 million people, he won the Eurovision Song Festival. His name is Mons Sermelo, a couple of years ago only, but almost like the next day, people didn't know who he was, and probably most people wouldn't recognize him in the street. On the other hand, if you look at things that are anti-fragile, it's much more interesting. Creativity, represented by the light bulb. I mean, you cannot be creative or inspired sitting in a blank room every day. Cher, I mean, the Terminator, let's be honest. I mean, she just keeps standing up and doing something new. And whenever there's a new wave of entertainment industry trends, she will hop on and shape it. I mean, compared to the European Union, which will probably not, well, it won't last forever, that's for sure, but Switzerland will outlive it. Bacteria getting stronger with penicillin. The two gentlemen, I mean, the one running on the right versus the one running on the treadmill on the left, you can imagine who will be quicker to leave a burning building. And then Mr. Trump, well, love him or hate him, he just gets stronger with the more stress is being put on him. So this is really interesting if you look at that from a business point of view, because on the left is everything is related to trying to project what's going to happen, to be very fearful of change. And on the right are things that are very welcoming to change because it makes them stronger. It helps them understand the environment they're in. And that really, you could say, is the role of innovation, is to make a business anti-fragile. It's basically making it play with the change, which is always going to come in the world, and create better products through it. Now, you could ask yourself then, well, what's the problem? Why is this so hard? And if you've spent a few years working in almost in any business, but particularly in a business that is continuously needing to update the products it takes to market, what you realize actually, creativity is not the issue. Coming up with new ideas is easy. I can squeeze creativity out of a rock if I need to. Back to the example of the Model T Ford, it was almost like the first expression of what really the problem in industrial manufacturing is even if you have like a completely radical product, the moment you have it, you don't want to change it because otherwise it's very hard to make it commercially viable. So well, with the Model T Ford, it was obviously you can have one if you order one that's black and if it's the Model T Ford, and otherwise you just go away and find something else which didn't exist. And that fight exists in every business. It's on one hand, it's the consumer facing or customer facing side of the business who want new features, new products, new everything. And on the other side are the people who have to make things, who just say, well, for God's sake, just don't change it because otherwise I cannot make it. I cannot make it at the scale and the price that you want. And those two worlds are always fighting. Every business I've ever been in or worked in, even my own, this is always the dilemma you have. The innovation world and the operational world, and the two will, well, in theory, they would never meet, but they have to meet because you have to come up with new things to pay tomorrow's bills while keeping the machine running that is paying today's bills. And how different these two worlds are kind of expresses how difficult it is to innovate. Because I have a fun example here, which is related to the world of flight. On the left is Mr. Frans Reichelt. He is prototyping a wingsuit, which he made himself, and he is about to jump off the Eiffel Tower. Now, he is very much in innovation world mode. On the other hand, if I compare that to, let's say, my pilot flying into Amsterdam, I do not want that person to be in innovation mode. I do not want to hear on the intercom, well, I'm not sure which runway I'll take this time. Maybe I'll actually try a sea landing for once, see if that works. I want him to stick to protocol, basically. Now, especially for this presentation, I have a short video of Mr. Frans Reichelt on the left, jumping off the Eiffel Tower. I'll actually just start it. I must warn you, you need to pay attention because it's very short. There we go. And there's Mr. Frans Reichelt, and there he was, and he's gone again. I don't even know if the internet connection could pick up that animation. the short story is he died. On YouTube, you can look up the whole video, which also shows literally the public then measuring how deep the hole was he left behind. But what it basically says is innovation is dangerous. Doing new things is dangerous, and getting something from the place where it's being invented to play with, let's say, whatever change in market happened into the operational world is hard. And that's, I guess, where you're shifting now into more or less the second half of this story, which is how do you do this really? And just by showing how it works, you can imagine when it fails, because it can fail at quite a few stages. There are really 4 steps you go through. And I'll be taking you through these steps with some examples and what that looks like in practice. I've mentioned most of these things in some form or other already, but it's understanding why you're innovating. It's finding the frustrations or the motivations or some kind of customer or consumer need you can actually do something about. Then creating solutions that work and that are affordable and not science fiction. And then being brave enough to do anything at all. And the funny thing is, as soon as you remove 1 or 2 of these, you get all the reasons people always talk about innovation being so hard and being difficult. You create the wrong products, or too expensive, or nothing ever happens. So let's look at these in a little more detail. I'll first give you a nice example of a product in the cough and cold industry that we did, I think back in 2014 or something. I mean, cough and cold is a whole industry in itself. It's a very, very stagnant one for 25 years, roughly. And our client was a Belgian business who had a brand in a couple of countries in Europe, was a natural product brand. It's basically sugar water with paracetamol. But anyway, they said they had a version which was natural. And they said, we want to get into the UK because the UK is very, let's say, medicated as a country, and they will buy medication for everything. That's where the pot of gold is. But we know we cannot break into that market because it's dominated by a brand called Lemsip unless we have something very radical. And they were thinking about all kinds of crazy things like new formats, say rub-on products, etc. But again, what this business is a cough and cold syrup business. Anyway, they gave us the brief. They gave us a stack of research to look through, saying the answer is in here. Well, they've done not hundreds, but dozens of focus groups and stuff like that. And then we realized, quite interestingly, that actually a very smart young lady on our team said, well, if you do focus groups on cough and cold, who are the people who cancel? Well, it's actually always the people who are sick who cancel. They stay at home. They don't show up at your focus group. So what they'd effectively done, we realized, was just do a lot of research amongst people who were perfectly healthy. So we needed to turn that around. And we put a few calls out. Of course, there's always, we had a team of like 70 people at the time. So there's always a few people ill on your own team. You ask around, do you know anyone else who's ill? And before you know it, you have like 24 people you can talk to who are either coughing really bad or ill. Anyway, we went into their homes. We all got ill ourselves. But we learned some really interesting things just by being with them. And one of the important ones is when you're in the store, we realized there's a problem here. And you can probably guess it, which is you're standing there and you have absolutely no idea which product to buy. Now, funnily enough, every player in this category has been playing the wrong card here, because what they just do is offer even more options. So there are brands where you have like 6, 7 different cough syrup options, depending on sort of what type of cough, how old you are, et cetera, et cetera. For us, the one single clue that gave everything away was when we were with one of our, let's say, sick friends who turned around to the pharmacist and started coughing in her face, saying, and then asked the question, what do you think it is? Is this a sticky cough, a tickly cough, a dry cough, a wet cough, a chesty cough, whatever cough? And then you realize the problem is people don't know what kind of cough they have, or if it's like one of their children, I don't know, it's this green stuff coming out of their face. What kind of cough is it? Which product should I buy? So that's half the problem solved. The other half is then, of course, how do I create something I can make money on? So obviously, this is when all the bad ideas start rolling out. Like, for example, hey, let's create an app. And when you open the app and you cough in the app, it'll recognize what kind of cough you have, and it'll point you right to our product. Now, that's a stupid idea because it's not going to make anyone money. And we're talking about a cough and cold business here. So the product we created is this one. You might know it. It's called Bronco Stop. And it's basically just one product for all coughs, whether it's a dry cough, as it says there, dry cough, chesty cough, tickly cough, mucus, catarrh. I still don't know what catarrh is, to be honest. It sounds like something a pirate would say, something like catarrh, matey. But I don't know what it is, but but the whole point here is it's one product for any cough, which means it takes the problem away. Now, that was a pretty brilliant solution, I thought, and particularly because, again, it's just a syrup and a pasty, which is what they always made. And in fact, it's actually the strongest product they had, and now just basically for everyone. But that still requires to act. And this is, I mean, a lot of the projects we were involved in stalled at this stage because this is a pretty dramatic solution. I mean, looks simple on paper, but just imagine if your whole business has always been about having like about 50 centimeters on shelf, half a meter with like all kinds of different products. And now all of a sudden this agency comes in and says, well, you only need one product. You still need to be pretty brave to go for it. And they were brave. They were so brave. They did the cheesiest commercial in the history of commercials with David Hasselhoff with the strapline, take the hassle out of coughs with David Hasselhoff. I mean, I'm not making this up. They actually did this. It's hilarious. There are a couple of them. You can still see them on YouTube. It's brilliant. And of course, what actually is happening here is radical transformational innovation. Even if the product is still more or less the same, all the rules have gone out of the window. It's only one product instead of 5. It has commercials which don't show people in white coats. It doesn't even show sick people. It's just completely different. And of course it stood out, and it took like 10% of the market in like one cough season. So it was incredible. Now that flow, those 4 steps, let's look at them a little more, like just again, some further examples on how that works, because this is how all of them work. I'll give you a few interesting frameworks also, just to, I don't know, if you ever get into sort of innovation challenges like this, or you're just wondering how to do new things, hopefully there's something interesting in there for you. I've already mentioned this whole thing about protect, grow, and transform. I won't dwell on that any further, but only just to repeat one more time, transformation is almost never required. If you always do your incremental improvements, then you should be fine forever because you'll always be on the lookout for the next big thing before it's too late. A lot of the teams I've worked with over the years use trend decks. I mean, that's always surprised me because trends look back. They basically describe what has been popular. It says nothing about what is going to be popular. But this sense of we should look at what the big motions are seems to be quite important for a lot of people. But then, of course, I've always just say, well, listen, if trend decks were important, you would hear about them being successful more often, and they're not. Even if you think about, and this is coming up, this is a slide I actually show to students when I'm in front of, let's say, a guest lecture audience. This 1996 is when I graduated. This was what the world looked like back then. I mean, yeah, we had villains in movies, we had operating systems, we had communication devices, we had ways of transport, we had light sodas, we were looking at the environment and coming up with wrong solutions. The Simpsons. I mean, there was a crisis going on, or at least there was one pending, which was the bubble, the internet bubble. If I go, let's say, what is it now, 27 years on, the world is still the same. We're still working on the wrong solutions for the environment. We still have villains in movies. We have God knows how many crises that we've passed. It just goes on and on. But if you look at it from a fundamental point of view, as in what people need, that doesn't change. It's the context around it that changes. And that's sort of where, when you're thinking about what is the business objective I need to answer, basic needs don't change, but the context does. And there's one other thing that changes, which is mindset of a generation. And there are two, it's coming up as an interesting chart. You're probably very aware of the differences between baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and now Gen Z coming on. You might not have heard of a book called The Fourth Turning, which gives a very interesting sort of framework around how, if you know the parent, you know the child, because you know how they'll raise them, and you know how, when children grow up, the way they grow up also defines what kind of parent they will become. And it's sort of a cycle. If you overlay those two, you get this really fun, colorful chart. It's not a pride flag. It's a very informational chart, because what it shows is how people move through life and how their mindset goes with it. So if you look at, well, I'll take myself as an example. I'm 50. I'm about as Gen X as you can get. I grew up literally abandoned. The parents away from home, latchkey kids, those kind of things. Grew up alienated in my 20s, which means, I don't know, listening to Nirvana and shooting heroin, that kind of stuff. That's only half true, by the way. Right now, actually, going into the 2020s, I'm in my very, very pragmatic phase, and I will end up a tough, probably miserable bastard. What is really interesting is if you look at how different the Generation Y, the millennials, are below that. They grew up overly protected. Everything outside was dangerous. Then moved into this heroic stance. It's no wonder Marvel has come up in the past, say, 10, 15 years, alongside things like Harry Potter as sort of the symbols of what good looks like. They're complete fantasy figures, but they're heroic, and they're moving into hubristic. Which means challenging the gods. I'd like you to remember that word just for a second, because I'll refer back to that a little later on in this presentation, because it's very interesting from what is happening in the consumer markets at this moment, on what basically this millennial generation who are now coming into positions of power are actually doing. Of course, it's easy to think about things like, I don't know, choose any gender you want at any time of day or turn plants into meats, but there's a more profound thing happening there. And I'll give you one example in a moment. The upcoming Generation Z, they're not just protected, they're suffocated, and they're just turning into oversensitive young adults who practically think everything is dangerous out there. And there's a real sense of fear for change boiled in or sort of grown into them. If you think about sort of defining where opportunities are, you might have heard the word white spaces and things like that, where say opportunities happen. If you just look back, just some of the things I've just mentioned on trends not really being useful or some movements being quite predictable. If you try to hop on those and say those are going to define what I'm going to be innovating for or working on, then they'll basically take you down a blind alley. What is much more interesting is looking at the ones that conflict. So when you have trends that are very relevant for you, where you just know both are true, but they conflict with each other. To give you one example is from a pet food client called Affinity, high-end pet food, Spanish company. And there are two very, very relevant trends for them, which are actually conflicting. One is anthropomorphism, basically people treating their pets as if they're kids. And actually, if you work with pet food manufacturers, they refer to their consumers as pet parents. That's one trend. A conflicting trend, which is completely driven by this, actually, it's almost cause and effect, is they want to feed their pets as if they're humans, doing like these sort of, my dog has all kinds of gluten allergies, or actually the opposite we also see is, my dog is sort of a descendant of wolves. It eats only meat, which of course is, basically it's like a Greek tragedy. They're killing their pets because they're feeding them like the humans they treat them like. Remember this just for a second. Well, actually, remember this forever, because looking for conflicting trends is a very powerful way of defining what to do. But we'll get back to this with a very scary example that I came across 2 weeks ago. That was quite a long piece on one step in the journey. I'll go a little quicker through these next couple ones. Market research is, of course,
You're starting to sound like Hegel with conflicting trends and synthesizing stuff. My God.
Oh, wait, I'm going to give you a massive headache.
My God.
Market research is interesting because that is what the whole innovation world runs on in large corporate environments. And I put toilet paper on screen because, well, on this call there, 15 people or so. That's already large enough to do research. If I would do research amongst you on toilet paper, I would ask questions like, how often do you use it? Do you find it's important? Would you be disappointed if I take it away from you? And very quickly, I would classify you as lead users of toilet paper because you are so important. And then I would ask you all kinds of questions of what you would want. Now, would that be of use? No, absolutely not. But it would look like useful inside a corporate environment. And then all kinds of big decisions would be made based on it. And that's, you could say, in a way, a problem, which is a lot of the research happens by just segmenting where people think the opportunity is. And they literally chop the world up into little bits and then do a huge number of surveys. And they say, well, that's exactly where we should go. And of course, it's never where you should go. But the problem is you can't go back. If you've just spent £200,000 or 220,000 euros on a massive piece of research, no one is going to dare lift their finger and say, hey, hold on, it might actually be wrong what is in here. That doesn't happen in corporate environments. So people go down the wrong track. Much more useful is just actually like the example with Bronco Stop, is just asking a few people a few questions and basically making very simple decisions. Should I go left or right, old or young, rural or domestic, or whatever, or urban? And you zoom in towards the solution. The best attribute of this is that if you get it a little wrong, you only need to do one step back to be roughly right again. And that's a big lesson I learned, say, from the point of view of market research, is it's always better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. And precisely wrong is exactly what most of these businesses play. Being roughly right also makes it a lot more unspecific, yet useful of what you're looking for. I'll get to that later on. It's frustration. If you find people who are frustrated about something, they wanted it to work. It's just that whatever the solution is that they have isn't delivering. That gives you something really powerful to work on. The only, let's say, second thing you need to think about is, and again, the Bronco Stop example is quite nice in that sense, you need to understand what the problem is, but you need to give them a solution they're excited about. And the word excitement is interesting because you could wonder, how could you be excited about consumer products? Well, the strongest form of that is usually when people talk about being excited about, well, so excited they will queue up for stuff to get their hands on it. And everyone knows probably a particular product type in their own life where they're just always so excited about when new stuff comes out, they will queue up. And that's kind of the emotion you're looking for. And in the Happen days, we created all kinds of fancy tools to help unpick that from, let's say, the world around us. So this, for example, is just the type of charts we would create when we would do analytics on product reviews of products that had been bought online and then reviewed online by whomever bought them. So if you're doing like work on laundry detergents or deodorants or face masks in this case, not the sort of the COVID face masks, but the personal care ones, cosmetic ones, it's easy to find hundreds of thousands of reviews that people wrote to tell about how that experience was, and you analyze them and you figure out what people want. Going into propositions, this is interesting because commercially viable in practice it's very polarizing what usually big corporations work on. Either they create a solution which is complete science fiction and impossible to make, but would be ideal if they could, or it's something which they can make, but it's totally uninteresting to the consumer and doesn't answer what that frustration originally was about. Now, I'm going to give you a framework to at least judge if you're working in the right direction. And it's a very, very simple way of looking at new ideas, which kind of tells you if you're actually making progress or if you're just playing around and fiddling with nothingness. It comes from a world called, or a methodology called TRIZ from actually the old Soviet Union. And what it says basically is progress in technology and product means one of these four principles. And I see one is half covered by the lawnmower, but it's being more perfect, which means delivering what people buy you for. More instant, which means it's only there when you need it and it's gone when you don't need it. More autonomous, which means it doesn't need information or fuel or all that kind of stuff for you to enjoy the benefit. And it becomes very, very cheap or even free. This is true. I've tried to disprove this for 10 years when I basically first came across this, and it simply holds up always. And even like with a product on screen, like a lawnmower, even if you have never worked in the lawnmower industry, you can kind of very quickly come up with all kinds of ideas along those four dimensions that would help improve it. So maybe like a laser guidance system for the perfectly flat lawn, or like a robotic one that combines instant and autonomous, which is a little robot lawnmower that only comes out when the grass is a certain height, stuff like that. Solar panels on, so you don't need fuel and it becomes cheaper to run. And of course, if you want to hit all four, you start realizing that the type of solutions may be different because people don't buy lawnmowers for the sake of having a lawnmower, but they want short grass. So maybe the solution is more in genetically modified grass seeds that only grow to a certain height or something like that. But these principles hold up. Now, the frustrating thing about really doing new things, in particular, I guess, in the world I've been operating in the past year, which is sustainability and better for planet solutions, is this: everyone is expecting the solutions to come from startups. Now, there's a fantastic little website to have a look at after this call. It's called Dead Startup Toys, and it shows countless examples of what happens when you give people who have no idea what they're doing the task to do something new and smart. And it's awful. It's absolutely god awful, and quite often it's even criminal. Like this example, you might recognize it, which is the Tyrannus device, which everyone knew was never going to work. Everyone at least went close to it, which was a blood testing device, 1 drop of blood to test like for hundreds of different diseases. But people kept piling their money in. And I can say in Holland here, where I live, we're now the proud owners of a similar case, which is the Lightyear 1, which was the solar car was how it was presented. Now, I can proudly say I'm glad it went bankrupt, because 3 years ago I was thrown off a jury for refusing to give this thing the first prize for innovation, because I accidentally just took a piece of paper and calculated very roughly if the thing was even possible. And of course, it's not possible. You cannot charge a car with only 5 square meters of solar panel. It doesn't work. You can do like 5 kilometers a day. It doesn't work. But the world is full of this kind of fraud. And I guess particularly when it comes to doing new things that are, let's say, answering the big problems of society, don't look at startups, or do so very, very carefully, like the ones on screen. They're total frauds. It really just means don't be naive. And there's a big issue around doing innovation in, let's say, the business environment, which is if money is being spent on it, it must be good. Well, this is just not true. Again, do the opposite of what LinkedIn tells you to. How to cut through the noise? I mean, it's not necessarily very difficult. A lot of the basic rules of, let's say, product innovation and marketing still hold up, even with radical new stuff. to just call out one. If whatever the new product is requiring more steps from the person using it to enjoy whatever it needs to do, then just don't do it. It's not going to work. People are lazy. And many more rules like that. Another interesting one is this is, you could say, the dream solution for new things is, I call it seed lip logic. It's the alcohol-free gin you might be aware of. Great product, not just because it tastes nice and has no alcohol and basically is answering a real problem for people who want to have a drink before they drive. It's a great product because it's smart. It's priced the same level as normal gin, but not only is the product dirt cheap to make because it's a tea basically, there's no tax on it. So the 20 euros or you spend on a bottle of that stuff is almost all into the pocket of the maker, whereas the 20 euros for the Beefeater on the left is, well, a lot is lost on the way. So that's smart stuff. We invested in a similar company, by the way, who sell very, very expensive soap, where it's dirt cheap to make. It's hilarious how that works. How to cut through all this, and now another term which actually I'm not going to refer to the one by the slightly overweight favorite probabilist of all of ours. But these two books, as you might realize, have sold in about equal amounts in the past 10, 15 years. Though one has been around for 2,000 years and probably will continue to be around for another 2,000 years, where the other one will probably not be read 50 years from now. And I'm of course referring to the Lindy principle, but there is something much deeper going on here. And this is going to take me into my scary case. A much more profound way of looking at what's going on here is called pace layering. This comes from a book called The Clock of the Long Now. Very, very interesting. It's actually a philosophy book in a way, philosophy engineering book. But what it shows is the pace at which things change.
Sorry, but philosophy is not welcome here. Thank you.
Yes, I'm very sorry, Mahmoud. So it's an engineering book that tries to explain how stuff works. Yes. If you look at the top layer, that's sort of what I was referring to as well, almost any innovation really. Definitely the flavor of the day. How do you keep people interested in your product? Sort of you continuously update the stuff. It's messy. What evolves much slower is how people make transactions to buy stuff, commerce, how people deal with each other. Much, much slower than that again is the world of infrastructure, how you make things, factories. Slower than that again is things like regulation, governance, but also religion. And below that even sits culture and effectively what is deeply ingrained into societies, which is kind of also connected to nature. A society that grew up, that basically has evolved near the sea, is a very different society from one that has evolved in the mountains, etc. These are very profound things. Now, let me just go a step back, because I mentioned I'd share something scary with you. So this has to do with conflicting trends. Working with a food company doing specialist nutrition, in particular baby food. I originally set up a set of trends just to tease them. Was Danone actually. And I said, listen, here are a couple of trends for you. You have a lot, I mean, Generation Z is the fattest human generation ever to walk the planet. There are a lot of overweight mothers with lots of complications themselves, creating very, very complicated nutrition, definitely from a nutrition point of view, babies who are basically born diabetic. Then there's the other trend, which is this still growing belief that what is effectively an upside down food pyramid of which you take half out is more healthy than, let's say, what they are stepping away from. Creating all kinds of bizarre products that are just perceived as the answer to the problem on the left, or actually probably they're to a large degree the cause of what's happening on the left. In the case of Danone, they have a third trend and a problem in a way, which is the mothership in Paris asking for some monetization of all those plant-based brands that they've created. Originally, I set this slide up as a joke, as in, haha, don't you dare go where you think you should go. Turns out they've already gone there. And a few months ago, they launched this, which is effectively a plant-based 50-50, but large plant components in what is really infant nutrition, newborn nutrition even. Now that's scary as hell if you think about the pace layering again, because it goes against some things that are not just culture, because they've launched this in the Netherlands, which culturally is a milk drinking country. I mean, if you've ever been to Holland, you know basically adults still drink milk, cow milk. But saying that your infant is going to be drinking plants goes straight against nature. It would be the first human generation to drink plants as effectively newborns. Not only that, you'd probably be the first mammal to do so, because even cows suckle teat. They drink milk. So it's a reason why you can be pretty sure up front, not just to bash a product which I don't like, but the chances of this succeeding are minimal because it goes against so many things that are hardwired into society, into the fabric of how people deal with each other and how they live their lives. That's what you could say that the more profound pace layering shows, and how to say judge good from bad. I'm going to hammer a few more of these slides before I finish, but this was a big point I wanted to make, because very often the answers are already staring you in the face, or the reasons why things don't work. Maybe just an interesting sort of as a contrast to this piece of work we did, which actually was very successful because it got Arla out of nowhere into the top 10 of biggest baby food manufacturers, with a very, very small market and actually almost no geographic footprint, but very, very high margin revenue. Friend of ours in the business, Arun, was on the innovation team when his firstborn was born. His daily life was working on products like this. It's all sort of rooted in nature, the power of, let's say, organic product in the fresh milk category. When he first had to go into the baby milk category, he thought, my God, what is this, the 1950s? It's like all sort of UHT milk, it's powder. I haven't seen this for like 50 years. This should be gone. What is this? And his question was, how do we find a way to get Arla into that category? Now, we spent time literally with particularly, say, families who had their firstborn. And funnily enough, it was, I mean, the opposite of where that Nutrilon plant-based example was taking us. This was really showing that particularly, of course, the mothers became super conscious with their firstborn of what they were eating themselves because of the breastfeeding. It was also the first time for many of them they would go into the organic food aisle and really sort of raise the quality of what they were eating. And of course, their husbands, who had grown equally fat during pregnancy, would be sort of following them like right behind them. So it was all about improved food quality and meal quality. And so it was a fairly easy step to make for a business like Arla to say, well, really the only thing we're going to do then is we're going to create exactly the same products, UHT milk and powdered milk, because we don't want to disrupt the category itself, but we want something which is framed completely differently, which is our organic, say, produce inside, which is impossible to do for those big players. Now, funnily enough, the business hated the idea because they were very worried of the big competition coming in to kill them. But that in practice didn't really happen. And it became a pretty successful range that is still in market many, many, many years later. Now, a little bit on that point, the word again, I'm using it again, and again, showing how you don't change the format. That's because of this. It's the easiest way to get to solutions you can afford to make is if you use the factory you already had, change very little to it to create a new product. So change the cactus to the fluffy little bear, and the product changes that comes out. Don't do anything more dramatic than this. And in a way, the solutions for the future, when it comes to more sustainable, better for the planet, etc., will all have a character like that, the ones that work. So this is one we came across a couple of years ago. We've exited in the meantime. Paper bottles, but designed such that you can actually run them off the same factory lines that you can fill normal plastic bottles. It sounds pretty obvious, but it was very easy sell into Diageo, into Unilever, into Estee Lauder, etc. And then all of a sudden you're making huge numbers because people don't need to change their factories, and you're having a huge impact for the positive at the same time. That principle of understanding that just figuring out what people want doesn't really cost very much, but then making it is hundreds of times more expensive. For some reason, that is so hard to get into people's heads. Even the ones working in these organizations will just refuse to acknowledge it. And they will just hope that if the idea is bright enough, it will work. The way we do this, or did this, I should say, with customers. So like, imagine this is just as a case that you're working for this brick bread company. What would seriously happen is someone would be working on products like this every day, and then a marketing person would come in and say, the future is artisanal. We need to go into round bread. And it's an absolutely huge opportunity. We'll all be millionaires if we can do this. Well, at the same time, the person working on that bread knows the factory on the other side of the door looks like this. And there's absolutely no way you're going to retool that for less than like 5 million euros, which means the risk is huge. So what do? It's not about finding a halfway house. It's about understanding how are you making the current bread. The analogy would be Lego, at least the one we use. So if now at the bottom left, you're making police stations, what is that made up of? Take it apart, understand what the customer wants, and then recreate a product which is made up of the bits you actually know how to use. How we would do that with customers is very simple. We would describe the features they can make on their factory line as literally features, saying how difficult or how hard they are to make. before you know it, you have like 100 or more different product features. If it's a food product, it's about the shape of the product, the texture, the flavor, all these attributes that make a food product what it is. And then you can just say, well, here are things we can do right now. Here are things you need a little bit of money to do. And here are things you should have never, ever asked for. Don't ask for round bread because that's just way too expensive. But then it leads you to, say, solutions you might be able to make, which can answer the question of being more artisanal, but do it through the technologies you have. Now, very briefly, because I'm at the very end of the story, moving and acting, which of course, moving quickly is something big businesses are very, very bad at. The reason for that is actually very simple. It's because if you remember this one, the innovation world versus the operational world it's a very different type of person that populates those worlds. And most people are on the right-hand side. This is not about being smart or stupid. This is about just being what kind of work attracts you. Well, a lot of people just like fine-tuning what already exists. And if you just look at what most large organizations have gone through in the past 10 years, they've just spent forever, all their money and all their time working on operational excellence, which means they've attracted a very particular type of person into their team in very, very large numbers. So what happens to the people who are not like that? So the improvisers, well, basically either they get killed, they get frustrated, or they leave the company. But what you're left with is what I would call systemic inertia. So you're left with a business that can no longer move. It's just because it's populated by people who are only interested in doing what they already know how to do in a slightly more optimal way. The only antidote, again, what I've ever come across as a term that reflects what you need to do is you need to get your team to experiment again and figure out and sort of carefully move back into that innovation world. And experimentation, we can probably talk for another hour about what that looks like. But what it comes down to is allowing people to play, even in highly regulated environments like food industries or pharma industries, and just being very clear on what the boundaries are. And those boundaries tend to be quite different from what people think they are. Very often boundaries are seen as a very specific way of working, where actually it's more about understanding where are the, let's say, the edges of where you can operate. Because again, you won't believe the number of, let's say, assumptions here again that I've come across on what is allowed and what isn't, when actually most of those are defined internally rather than by regulators or customers or anyone else. So it's more or less there that I'd like to end. Here's a nice example of experimentation, and might actually be from one of you on the call that I got this picture from, but that's basically Generation X experimenting. It's slightly older than Generation X. I would probably be one of the kids on the ground there. And you're wondering, how is this allowed to happen? Because God knows what came before. Well, there's an adult in the room watching it all and making sure people will be okay. And that's kind of my story on innovation and how it works and how to get to innovation success. So, of course, I have a cartoon to end on for our Q&A. And yeah, that was almost exactly an hour, I think, that I spoke. So I will switch share screen off. I hope you're still there. You're still there. Hey, fantastic. You're still there. And a lot happened in the chat. Anyone? Was that okay? Was that comprehensible? Okay. Mahmoud, this is where we do conversation, isn't it?
Thank you very much. This was really good. And yeah. First off, before I ask any questions, does anyone have anything to ask, add, share?
I'm scrolling through the list. What did Mark Baker, the guru's face was priceless. What did he do?
He was at a coffee shop, then he moved to Starbucks, and now he's moving downstairs. But Suhad's question, other than that, like, yeah, with everything else you can ignore. Suhad's question is, what's your idea of social enterprises?
I don't know what social enterprises are, really. I think I've heard of the term, but I don't have any specific association with what it means. Forgive me for that. So what does it mean?
Yeah.
No, speaking of sustainability and
Yes.
all these terms, there is like a new terms used lately in the like entrepreneurial ecosystems, which are basically social businesses and social enterprises, and having like businesses seeking triple bottom goals, let's say
okay,
profits,
in that sense.
human.
Yeah.
Yes.
So being a very pragmatic and almost tough Generation X, I say that's all fine as long as the business makes money. Again, being absolutely brutal about this, what I've come to realize in the past year, because I've been like up to here in sustainability initiatives and everything, the only places I've seen it work is when the topic of sustainability, believe it or not, is owned by supply chain. If it's owned by anyone else, it leads to solutions that are not commercially viable, which effectively means they're unaffordable for the business or for the shareholders of the business. And I even dare say, if you put it under supply chain, they will be way more critical than any other discipline in an organization on, is this indeed affordable and will it add to the bottom line in any way, or at least not harm the bottom line, which means they'll be much pickier in what they choose, but once it's there, they'll stick to it, because also supply chain hates to change things. So that is probably a very politically incorrect way of answering the question, Suad, but yes, of course, it's good to do all kinds of good things for personnel and everything, but yeah, I don't think it's very truthful in most cases. I mean, even if you just open your LinkedIn now, you can see the number of people being fired by businesses that probably were sort of a triple bottom line and said they were non-evil and good for everything. When business is in danger, none of that counts. The only thing that counts is it profitable? Are we making money? Mark, you're waving. I can't hear you.
You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I missed the last question because I had to rush outside Starbucks. So
Yeah, the question was on
floor.
social enterprises. So, and
Oh.
I'm paraphrasing a little bit, Suhad, so forgive me if I'm not doing it correctly, but it's, you could say that the rise of businesses that have more on their sort of purpose definition than just creating profit for shareholders, and say this is about being good for the environment, it's being good for people in the company, people outside the company, and can they maintain that?
It's an interesting thing because I haven't got your experience, but to plug Gang Fit 4, which is coming out soon, I actually wrote that the businesses who say they're socially progressive or they're doing good things for the planet and everything, eventually what will happen, they get hoisted by their own petard, because the ultimate thing is profit, okay, is to make money.
Yes.
And so, for instance, whilst they're growing, they'll say, look, we pay taxes, we do our carbon, blah, 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 whatever, we employ people. But when they start, when the profits go down, or when they start, they're going to have to change that, get rid of people.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're going to have to do things that they said earlier. So the businesses that grow by saying, we do good, or whatever Google said, or Facebook, or whatever it is, when there's a downturn, they're going to have to do bad. And so, in a sense, they're making a rod for their own back, ultimately, because everyone will see the hypocrisy of what they're saying.
There is one caveat. There is one, sorry to interrupt you, Mark, but there is one version of this, which I believe it does make a difference, which is when you put the time factor on, is if you are a business that is continuously doing bad, and I mean like clearly harming the environment, being bad for just bad, it eventually becomes very hard to get new talent into the business. And over time, that's a death sentence. So yeah, so it's I've seen it actually happen in one of the food companies I work with a lot, which is Mondelez, they own Oreo and Cadbury and Milka, etc. They became known for a pretty ruthless, operational oriented way of running the business, not very innovative or R&D oriented. And also just not being very queued up when it comes to slavery and chocolate and all these things are now, I guess, pretty much highlighted as being evil. It's impossible for them to get good talent on the business. No one wants to work for them. And that is really a much bigger problem over time to consider. Yeah, and also businesses, because I'm kind of skipping one type of business, I realize. That was maybe a little too much shooting from the hip just now. Big, actually also small, but you notice the difference with big family-owned businesses who are in there for the long game. and it's one of the most impressive feats from that point of view I've seen with, at least from the ones I've worked with. It was Barilla, big Italian food company. I mean, not just are they the best employer, because of literally people get married inside that business with each other. I mean, it's like one huge family, but this is like a €5 billion business. It's huge. But also the realization that of basically now the generation who run it, which is like third generation, I think, 3 brothers and a sister. But I think it's particularly 2 of the brothers who are like in the daily, still in the daily business. They're thinking of a legacy and making sure they hand this over in a good form. And then all of a sudden just to give you one example, and there's many. Actually, I'll give you 2 examples because they're so good. One is on the product side. So their portfolio has an absolutely vast number of biscuits, cookies, breads, basically bakery products. And one thing you need a lot of for that is palm oil, particularly if it's like what they call ambient. So you need to keep it on shelf for a very long time. One of the programs we did with them was all about what are the big bets for the future. And one of those bets was we need to remove the palm oil. Now, I come across that in every other food company I work with, and no one would ever do anything, because the moment you take palm oil out of a product and replace it by something else, the flavor changes. It's a completely different experience. Barilla took like 1,000 products, like literally 1,000 SKUs, as they would call it, and they reworked all the recipes to take all the palm oil in 6 months. And then in the next 6 months, they implemented it. And when I asked them, how on earth did you do this? How did you get this? Because I've seen it so often, not even one product change. Because I said, what did you do about the flavor change? And the guy, I don't know, Roberto Bertoni, I think was his name, head of bakery, said, oh yeah, the flavor changed. I said, the flavor changed. So what do you do with what about the consumer base? Aren't you losing people? Oh yeah, we're losing people. We're also winning a few, and it was the right thing to do. That was his whole motivation. It was the right thing to do. So that just shows what I guess is over-indexing almost on that sort of willingness to act. Now, if it's smart from a business point of view on the short term, probably not, because they'll have seen a dip. On the longer term, it's probably the right thing to do anyway, because they're ahead of regulation coming in. Another example, maybe just again, they had like something like 100 trucks come into their main factory every day. That's like through Parma, which is like not, I mean, if you've driven through Parma, it's not like an easy way in or out of that place. So 100 trucks just for one factory is pretty bad. They managed to get the municipality and probably paid the municipality to basically change the railway track passing Parma to have an extension to go through the factories, and then get stuff in by rail wagon, just to make sure that that place stayed more livable for longer. I mean, that's what family businesses do, because again, they're part of the infrastructure, they're part of the culture, almost at a cultural level, governance level of what that society around Parma in this case is about. And it's again, it's that pace layering in action. I'll stop talking there. Yes.
It's an interesting thing, because the Cornish fishing industry has sort of done a similar thing. How they've changed certain things they do, found new markets. And they're also trading on their local supply. You know, that they're not a big company and everything. You should look into the Cornish industry, how they've managed to rebrand what they do.
The fishing industry in particular.
Yeah, the fishing industry. Yeah, and how they've restructured, and it sort of goes with the zeitgeist of like localism. I know it's not new, but it still is. It's like a bigger thing, you know, localism and helping local industry, and they're all family businesses against the corporate, you know, not corporation and stuff. So it's a very interesting thing. So if you get time to look at it, well, I don't know what you get from it, but I just find it very interesting how things are. But with all of your presentation, is there a mistake that we can view it as an exact science? Okay, because what you're looking at, when you look at the businesses that do well, you may ignore the silent evidence for businesses that have done the same thing and they haven't done well, or they've gone bust and they've disappeared from the scene and everything. So when it comes to sort of things expanding a business, whether it's protect, grow, transform, is it an exact science? You know, is the consumer rational? Are they irrational? You know, do they make contrary decisions? I know you've got the different age groups and the boomers, generation Z and Y, as you said, but really is the kernel of being able to succeed in the market, notwithstanding what you've said. But is it in one sentence, can you say there's something which a company can do, which will help it grow, or at least help it succeed in the market? What is
Yeah, it is to be in touch with the real world as much as possible. So when you have product ideas, launch it small, because the market will tell you whether something works or not. Like with the plant-based infant nutrition, they have tested that thing to death, and they will have put like pictures of it, descriptions of it in front of probably thousands of people who would all say, oh yeah, I would really like a plant-based infant nutrition, because when my baby comes, I want them to be like, I want them to grow up vegetarian and sort of be better for the environment. And then when they're in front of the shelf, they think, yeah, maybe not, and they'll take something else. It's no, because that's so. It's really funny you bring this up. I remember having organized a session with Mondelez, so this huge food company, and in the session I invited a couple of literally very small entrepreneurs who had like very small product ranges, and one of them was a business called can't remember the name. It'll come to me in a moment, but they did peanut butter. And the guy was explaining when he did a new peanut butter, because he had all these variations, he would literally go to whatever, say, Tesco branch was nearby, and he said, I would like to trial this in your shop. Who at Tesco head office do I need to talk to get like 20 bottles of this stuff or packs of this stuff on shelf for a couple of weeks? And that's the way he would do it. So he would do it one shop at a time. If it works, then he knew, okay, I can basically grow this into a few more stores. If it doesn't work, I'll take it off. No harm done. Cost him £1,000. Mondelez would do nothing unless they could trial it, like trial, not even sure they would formally launch it, but trial in 150 stores. Just imagine just the amount of work and just the fact you need to put so much effort in makes the real loss of face if it doesn't go well, which means, first of all, people will probably not even go to the point of starting it. And when they start it, they will keep something unsustainable going for way longer than it should, not to lose face. So if you want to do this well, it's all about small steps. That's why I mentioned if you do incremental innovation all the time, you never need to do anything dramatic, because incremental means every 6 months you're actually looking, okay, what shall I do now? And of course, that looks a little bit frantic or ADHD to some people, but no, it's the right way to stay in touch with how the world moves. And it also will make sure that you don't get too wedded to whatever solution or whatever format you're pushing into market in a massive scale, because it'll force you to be able to adapt it and tune it.
I mean, you mentioned our slightly overweight risk probabilist friend, and he did say, you know, the problem with a 5-year plan, it's like a highway without exits. And you sort of touched on that, you know, with a 3-year plan.
3-year plans.
Think,
it's the norm. Every one of our clients would make 3-year plans. If you wrote a 3-year plan today, 3 years ago, you would have missed both COVID and Ukraine. It would not have appeared in your plan at all. It would have been like all sort of up curves and more stuff through retail, and you wouldn't have thought about e-commerce or anything that eventually came up, or any struggles in supply chain. So yeah, I mean, 3-year plans, any plan that is more than, let's say, a production cycle is a hypothesis, and hypothesis cycles are probably between 6 to 8 weeks.
I thought you said hippopotamus.
No. Production cycle. Yeah, they're all hypotheses. I'm not a native speaker, Mark, so my English bad.
No, you see, the thing is, you called it Nutella, and I'm sure it probably is Nutella, but of course, in the UK, it's Nutella. We all call it Nutella.
Nutella. That's Nutella. So the wrong way to say it. It's Nutella.
I know, but it's all well, I've learned something here, because over here it's all Nutella, and it doesn't taste of nuts at all. It just tastes like chocolate.
Chocolate and sugar.
Sweet chocolate. Yeah, exactly.
It's absolutely screamingly sweet. Yeah.
Yes.
Let's see. Did any other questions come through? To what extent do you think entrepreneurship and innovation can be taught? I think innovation can be taught. Entrepreneurship needs to be awakened, I think. I spent the first 10 years of my life being a total work hour man. A salary man, slave to a company. And then one of my, then what became a business partner said, should we just try and break out on our own and see if this works? And I thought, yeah, why not? And I had a week before, I would not have thought of becoming an entrepreneur. The problem though is there's no step back, by the way. Once you become an entrepreneur and you have some traction, 2-3 years, maybe actually 2-3 months later, you actually realize, fucking hell, I'm never going back. I learned this also in the most abrasive way I could have ever feared, which was when we sold the company. I had, of course, to spend some time in the company that bought us. And the first meeting I had with the person who was to be my boss, I realized, oh my God, I have a boss again. And it's like almost by nature, I had conditioned myself to do the opposite of what someone in power tells me to do. Because that's kind of how you make anything work when you're outside big corporate. Whatever the big ones do, you do the opposite. And yeah, that was tough.
That's the problem.
So
Became
you do it carefully.
unemployable.
Yeah, unemployable. That's kind of what you do
Became
become.
unemployable.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you have a business.
Yeah,
I'm
you've
unemployed.
turned that into an art. I sort of it's sort of I crept into that and didn't really realize how bad it was until it smacked me in the face. Awakened when life hits you in the face. Yep, totally. Did I miss any questions further up? I'm just scrolling.
Is there any role for startups in innovation? Because so much are bullshit. Is there a sensible role?
Yeah, so many are so shit. The thing is with startups is there are two types of startups. The ones who look for venture capital, which are, well, if I would take the numbers I've had in front of me, 99.5%, not startup businesses, but investment vehicles. And they've literally set up their, and I've discovered what a serial entrepreneur actually means. It's someone who understands the trick of setting up investment vehicles. And they become like the evangelist for whatever the big theme of their startup is, and they just try to attract money. I mean, I live in The Hague. Now, The Hague is trying to reframe itself as Impact City, and it organized a festival called Impact Fest. It sounds a bit vile, but actually it was vile, because there were like 200 startups coming into the city to present their ideas to people who might be interested in investing. And it was like 200 kids selling lottery tickets. They were absolutely not, they had no concept of what it requires to make money, or I'm making a bit of a generalization, of course, but no interest, at least, in showing that they could make money. It was all about how much had they raised, and that was proof for how good they were. I've raised 100,000. That means I'm really good. I should be able to raise another 100,000. I've raised 1 million. I should be able to raise 2 million, etc. So startups of the investment vehicle kind, I would just stay far away from. Startups of the, I'm building a business and I have my own money in, and I'm working for no salary whatsoever for at least a year, because that's when money might start coming in. That's a very different type of startup, of course, but that would just be a young business. It wouldn't even call itself a startup, probably. So yeah, the ones I've come across that actually are good, at least I thought were good, it's all my opinion, of course, were all set up by people who come from the industry that they're actually creating a new solution for. So they know how the industry works, they know what the issues are, and they know where customers live and how to find them, how to approach them, how to get their product across. I mean, here in this room, so in my, say, living room workspace, to give you an example of how bad they can get, there was a young man, late 20s, I mean, smart kid, no doubt. His pitch started with what is like almost a cliche of how all these sort of green companies are now operating. He said, yeah, I was on holiday in Indonesia, in Bali or something. And when I walked into the ocean, I was just so shocked. I was up to my knees in trash. So I came home and I thought, what am I going to do about this? And here it is. It's a refillable shampoo bottle. And I'm just listening to this guy and thinking, you are such an idiot. You don't know anything about the shampoo industry. You know nothing about the plastic bottle industry. You probably don't know too much about waste in the ocean anyway, but you're not solving anyone's problem. Where do you think this is going? But this kid had already raised 100,000. So he thinks he's doing great. He thinks everyone's excited about it. And then, well, that's basically the next Theranos, just waiting to happen. Like fleecing investors for a few million by the time you realize this is not going to work. And then, of course, all the investors want their money back, so we have to continue raising, and then you have a pyramid scheme on your hands. So it's yeah, it's a pretty dark space, I realized. And
there are some people, of course, who win the lottery tickets and who then generally become investors in new startups. So it's also kind of a self-reinforcing thing.
That's a very good point. Absolutely. And the success stories are almost without exception technically failures. I mean, Uber still needs something like 500 million every quarter just to stay afloat. And it's hailed as a success by a lot of these people, as in, wow, amazing company. Yeah, you could have made money on the way by getting in and stepping out, but it's a bad company. It's just losing money for everyone. And same is true for Airbnb, for Spotify, for all these sort of so-called unicorns. There's no viable business there. So if you look at those kind of spaces for big solutions for societal progress, it's not going to happen. Not in my view, but I might be. Feel free to disagree with me, by the way.
Yeah, no, I totally see the point there. I've played around with like trying to build businesses, and I've also attended startup weekends, and you get exactly that. Well, you do have some people who actually understand this point, and who say, for instance, don't start a startup, but just build a business.
Yeah, exactly.
They understand it, but there are also people that are indeed just like trying to get the money and invest.
Don't try to get rich in 3 years. Do it in 5 to 10 years, and build something that is very, very attractive by the end of that journey. It's not impossible. It's just slower. Yeah. Let's see.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Let's see. Telmo, yes, you're right. Uber is a fraudulent, fake business that has killed a very viable taxi industry. As long as stupid investors' money fuels good service. Urtats, I have bad news for you. Oh, I really do. To give you an example, when I came to see you in Bilbao, I was there at a event organized by the European Union, funded by European public money, who were putting a shocking amount of money in companies trying to create, I don't know, packaging material from seaweed, or something of the like, which is complete bullshit. And it's your tax money, my tax money. That's just basically people virtue signaling that they are putting money, public money, where they believe the solution will come from. The solar car example I showed earlier on has a lot of Dutch public money in, and it's all down the tubes on something that on day one was not viable. Just looked good, sounded good. That's the horrible reality, to be honest. That's why I've come out of that this past year working in this space pretty fucking cynical. So yeah.
I have a question. I don't know how to properly articulate, because I asked this also a friend who recommended the power law. And my question is as follows, because you mentioned problem solving. Is there a difference in the mindset between, like, for me, when you say problem solving and we need to be problem solvers, and as a startup, we need to solve a problem, I automatically think Silicon Valley, US, Anglo-Saxon. Does this mentality also exist within the European kind of mindset? Because around here, I don't know how the venture capital and the innovation world is, but for some reason, I thought, like this is more of an American thing, the obsession with, I need to solve a problem.
No, I would say the American version isn't. I'm going to make it maybe a dramatic statement, but I would not say that's really problem solving. It's much more around problem creation almost, and that's why they're not sustainable in the solutions they create. And they hope that's because the only ones that seem to have some kind of public success are one of the 1,000 attempts, and the other 999 of stupid sort of solutions you won't even see. To give you an example, actually, a culturally looking for conflicts and trying to resolve them is actually quite, I think, a far East Asian sort of cultural thing that Japanese and the Koreans do very well. Sort of, what's the contradiction? What's the conflict still hidden in the current solution? And how do I overcome that conflict? I think in Europe, from what I've seen, it's not better or worse than in the US, as long as you just stay away from this whole it's going to require money to grow attitude. We need to grow and be market dominant sort of ambition, which is so true for indeed Silicon Valley and that sort of view of where new ideas come from. If you look at any business, even inside every business, there are always groups of people who are very happy employees of the business, but who fundamentally disagree with how some of the things are being done inside the organization. Those are usually the best people to get involved in innovation projects, because they're very opinionated about where improvement could be found. Maybe they do not have the oversight from their little sort of island from which they operate on what is good for the whole business, but they tend to be very active in trialing things and trying to improve things. And if I look at where over time most good solutions come from, it is from existing businesses resolving problems with the old world, rather than trying to create something completely new from out of thin air, just because they found some kind of problem to resolve. I mean, well, if you go again to the somewhat silly example of the cough syrup I shared, that's a typical problem that has come into existence because people have been flooding the market with silly products. It just becomes a problem, and it's just no one realizes it's a problem until someone points their finger there and says, "Hey, there's a better way of doing that," and then actually dares to challenge the paradigm a little bit and put it to market. It's yeah, I'm not really sure if I'm answering your question, but I would say problem solving, frustrations. That's kind of where most good new ideas find at least a foothold.
Yeah, so this is also kind of the mindset in Europe as well. Like we're trying to solve a problem, or are we just trying to?
Yeah, or just to follow a trend. Again, that back to that stupid plant-based food, infant nutrition. You can just see there is no problem being resolved there because there was also a half and half product. So even if you're one of these really bizarre hardcore vegans who has managed to get pregnant and breastfeed a little bit and now needs to switch to formula, which is literally biologically very, very hard to do, then even for them, a half and half product is no solution. Someone who is not on the complete sort of vegan end of the spectrum will not pick a product like that over a standard sort of scientifically proven historical, let's say, infant nutrition formula, because that's what they've probably grown up on. That's what their parents have fed them. And so it's there is no problem being resolved there. So that immediately gives it almost no license to exist, if I'm framing it a little bit dramatic.
So I had this saying, a coach I know keeps saying, you need to sell painkillers, not vitamins.
Yes, it's also, here's another one for you, Suhat, which is, if you have a headache, it's not because of lack of aspirin. There's an interesting sort of cause and effect in there. It's funny, the painkillers versus aspirins, there is a little bit of a generational thing there. It's interesting. When we were working with a business called Voltaren, at least the brand called Voltaren, I can't remember who owns it, might be GSK, which does painkillers. If you sell it to my generation, we talk about painkiller and sore joints and basically trying to be a 35-year-old when you're a 50-year-old and sort of being sore everywhere. If you sell it to a baby boomer in their early 70s, you say, no, this is about freedom to move. You can still dance. You can do all these things you used to do when you were young, but your joints are too achy. So it's that the tone and the, let's say, the way you frame your solution is dependent on sort of the big, broad audience you hope to succeed at. And you can put exactly the same product inside. Speaking of painkillers, Nurofen, one of the Reckitt Benckiser brands that also owns Vanish, etc., they have like 10 different types of Nurofen for regular sort of fever suppression and headaches. They have it for migraine. They have it for period pain. They have it for literally, there's like 10, maybe a dozen different types. I've been in their factory. It's exactly the same pill in every pack. Like, no, they didn't even bother to change the color. It's just making sure that everyone who could have use for the product and might be interested in it has the answer presented to them on shelf in a way that attracts them. And I mean, I remember giving that case actually to a group of students who said, but isn't that illegal? Why would it be illegal? I mean, the product is absolutely fine, and it's fine for all those cases. It's just if you put everything on one pack, first of all, you only have like this tiny little shelf space, which makes basically people overlook you. If you have that kind of space with all those different benefits and different packaging, if you're willing to pay for all the different packaging and the different facings, then why not? I mean, that's the way the world works in consumer goods. Sorry, that was a very long sort of response to your point, Suhat, but Um,
How's it? I mean, this is just a question because I'm interested. Like, what's it been like for the past year? You know, trying to get into the sustainable kind of development venture capital
it made
world.
me realize how naive I was.
In what
mean,
sense?
I've been working with the biggest companies in the world, and I thought I was pretty much a rock star when it came to coming up with new things. This has been very humbling, realizing how wrong I was when it came to almost the other half of where new things happen, which is where all the public money is going, where all the investor money is going. I thought, I'm going to now put my money where my mouth is, and put some of my own money in, and I'm going to sort of start investing myself with other people in businesses I believe are great. And I come into this space and I realize this is not a great space.
The sustainable bit or the venture capital bit in general?
Well, both in a sense, because there's so much nonsense being peddled. I thought, okay, I can probably deal with investors being money grabbers and just like very short-term oriented. What I wasn't prepared for was all these startups being so ruthless in sort of basically building pyramid schemes one after the other. It was just plain shocking, and it made me realize and reappreciate that even in the old world of big companies, even if like 2/3 of them were pretty awful and not really sort of working with the right purpose, 1/3 of them were, and actually having a way more impact, like the Barilla example I gave, way more good impact for the world and the planet and the people that buy their products than any of these startups would ever have. So it's I'm still questioning how to bridge the two. So it's why I'm still not clear what I'll do next. I mean, I'm not in a hurry, but it's my head went from pretty crystal clear on that this is where I wanted to go to it's being sort of more of a lumpy soup, not very crystallized at all. And I'm just having to try to figure out where can I still do something fun that adds value that people are willing to pay for.
That was just my next question, Costas. How can we arbitrage this gap and benefit from it and do interesting?
I don't know. It's it's so hard because the big corporations, let's be honest, I mean, if you look at the top 100 largest economies in the world, more than 50 of them are companies, not countries. So they operate like countries. They're absolutely massive, and they have politics like you won't believe. And that means decisions are not necessarily made rationally. They're made where political benefit can be gained. What got our business, our agency, into some trouble around 2015 roughly was that almost overnight, it seemed like this wave came through the corporate industry of creating startups rather than hiring professional agencies to do their innovation work for them. They realized, well, hey, instead of spending a million euros a year on a couple of agencies, let's just give a couple of 20-year-olds 50 grand and see if they can solve the problem for us. If they don't, it's only 50 grand wasted. If they do, hey, we'll look great because we have startups. And that basically, that was a pretty tough couple of years, having to sit that through while businesses were doing very, very stupid things. When everyone could see this is just stupid. I mean, you might have heard of Unilever's Foundry. I don't think anything successful has ever come from that. Definitely not the next Dove, the next Magnum, the next, say, big brand for them. But they presented it to the outside world, to their, say, shareholders, and then to the talent they tried to attract into the business, as in, you're so on the forefront of all this good stuff. It's absolutely worthless. It's a waste of money. So that's kind of the problem when bridging the gap is you're bridging it towards not necessarily the best place to be, and that's what makes this so hard.
And before we go, before I ask the questions in the chat, because you mentioned this, and this is quite interesting. I was going to ask this question. So it looks like both are like what you presented and what you're now criticizing, both have this small bets kind of approach, but one is monetary and the other is this playful attitude of trying to tinker a bit with the product and come up with some sort of new innovation?
Maybe a little bit. No, I think it's more about the big questions that need to be answered, because a lot of the manufacturing that happens, at least in the industries I've seen, is too energy intensive, too much waste being generated, too much waste, which is also completely unprocessable. So there are big challenges to resolve. It's more sort of, where's the solution going to come from? And I think it's more likely big solutions will come from big companies, but it might not be, I'm thinking out loud here, it might necessarily be in the form everyone expects it. So to give you an example, actually, of a company I was talking about just this afternoon with a friend of mine, which is Philips, big Dutch industrial conglomerate. Well, it's actually now a very, very small industrial conglomerate because they've sold off all the bits that worked, which is like ASML, NXP, all these, and these have become very, very successful spin-offs, but the mothership has basically died in the meantime, and is in a pretty dire straits, looking basically into the future with a lot of problems on their hands. So it might just be that it's more of a, almost like shape-shifting, where companies transform themselves completely without actually the objective of doing so. But it's just because, like, well, actually, let's take Philips as an example. Designing chips, building chip manufacturing machines, building the chips themselves, that just didn't fit into what Philips wanted to do as an organization, but it was clearly valuable to sell off. So it's almost like an organism getting rid of a virus or a bacteria, or just shedding something. And that actually then grows and just becomes its successful self without all the harm of the mothership trying to sort of contain it, control it, manage it, etc. Maybe that's something we'll see more of over time, but I don't know. It's almost an impossible question. If I had the answer, I would already know what I'd be doing over the next few years, but I don't yet. Any other question? I think I saw a question about entrepreneurs. Yeah, let's see. Entrepreneurship boot camps, market sizing. Yeah, market size. That is, it's not even worth an exercise, I would dare say. So I think I agree with you. If it's an existing sort of category and the product idea that the entrepreneur has is sort of comparable to something that exists, you can just look this up. You don't need to do an exercise around it. And really, the only question you need to ask yourself is, am I aiming for a big chunk of a small market or a small chunk of a big market? But then really the question the entrepreneur needs to answer is, can I sell it? Do I know who I'm going to give this product to, who will give me money in return? On either very big scale, or through a distributor, or through direct to the user, or whatever model is driving it. But I mean, every single one of the 150 pitches I sat through last year had some kind of impressive story about how it was a $3 billion market of which they were going to gain 5% in 5 years' time. It's all pointless unless you have that route to market nailed. You understand how I'm going to get what I have to offer to the person paying for it. Route to market is probably the word I would look for, and that's very worthwhile doing exercises around. I have this thing. How am I going to get money for it in return? It's that simple. The question is that simple. And if you get like a really vague answer, you know they have no idea what they're into. It's also what is very different between people who come out of the industry versus the ones who invent a refillable shampoo bottle and have absolutely no idea where to go with it. And that's the reason you know they'll never succeed. It's just, what are you going to do? Like spend 5 years, figure out who wants to buy this, and then discover no one wants to buy it? No, it's just pointless. Even if you have like only like literally a post-it with a description, but you can say, this is the solution I've come up with to this problem, and here are the 5 first people I know I can sell it to because I know they have this problem. I'm in, but I never hear a story like that. I just hear something vague along the lines of, people want more plant-based in their diet. That's why I'm developing this cell-grown, animal-free, lactose-generating piece of yeast. And I think once I have that developed, which is going to cost me 50 million, by the way, that people will be queuing up to buy it from me. I said, okay, who are they? I don't know, but they will be queuing up because it's so good. That's what these typical pitches look like. So yeah. Again, a long winding answer to your question, Suad.
Given all that, Mark is asking, why not retire and play golf?
Why not? To who are you asking that? Are you asking that to me?
Yeah. Because you were, but this was in response to what you were saying about being disillusioned with the
Oh
you
yeah.
know, the
Well, first of all,
VC
I don't play
market.
golf. I might enjoy it when I try it, but I've literally not. I've done it once, like 25 years ago. But I think I am, to be brutally honest and transparent with you, I think I am suffering from savior complex because I've seen so much shit happen. I just feel a very deep urge to fiddle with it and say, you're doing it all wrong. Get out of the way, and let me tell you how to sort this shit. And I know it's really annoying, and I know also it's unprompted advice, which no one wants. So that's why I need to find a forum where they will pay me to come and do it, because then I know it's at least being paid. So like the like the plant-based infant nutrition example, I basically gave that to the infant nutrition company creating that product, tell them, what the fuck are you doing? And they paid me for it. So at least I identified their problem. Yeah, so it's actually that. So that's, sorry, again, long-winded answers only. That's why I'm not going to go play golf and do nothing. I'm going to do a little less now coming year than I did last year, but I'm eager to find that sort of that angle in. Put lots of small bets in to figure out what the right one is, and I'll get there. Not in a hurry, but I'm sure I'll get there.
If you ever need Ponzi coaching, I'm here.
Yes. I'm sure, Mahmoud. I mean, this might actually be a really good space for you. Like how to create something which looks benign but is a total evil fraud underneath the bonnet. Yeah. Have you tried creating a Ponzi? Yeah. It's oh man. Let's see, any other questions?
Isn't that the DARPA approach, funding crazy ideas, Mark?
Yeah,
asked?
DARPA, that's interesting. It's I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, DARPA in a way is, yeah, it's all about skunkworks and sort of taking what is a problem. But I think here's the thing, and I have no evidence to prove this. But when you create skunkworks, you create a skunkworks around a question, not a solution. And that's what makes it work, is when you get like a couple of smart people out to solve a very big, hairy problem for you, rather than sending them out to develop whatever you task them to develop. And again, that's pure sort of guesswork. But if you look at the famous skunkworks, whether it's Project Alamo to create the nuclear bomb, or where they were all tasked with a very big question to answer. And yeah, it's but it's the difficulty with bringing something like that into the, let's say, corporate world is that's not how most big businesses work, because the moment you carve out a small team out of an existing business and you say you go out in isolation and work on this for 2 or 3 years, what you get is all kinds of at least this is what I've seen, is all kinds of unforeseen problems, which is, okay, but how about my career then? If I spend 3 years here, will I be on the same career path as if I'd stayed 3 years in the mothership? Or you'll have an R&D person say, yeah, but I'm going to spend like 3 years developing deep knowledge about something I don't know you're going to continue doing. What do I do when I come back? Are you going to be interested in me continuing work on, I don't know, tooth whitening, toothpaste? Or is that sort of going to be like pushed aside in what I do with the past 3 years? So it's very hard to do in a modern corporate environment. And it's much more, I mean, DARPA, as I'm not mistaken, is public funded, basically military money. That might make more sense in that context. A little bit like sort of deep fundamental research in academia. It's also, yeah, that doesn't follow the rules of modern, let's say, corporate structures and career paths in particular. Career paths are such a challenge in innovation, time and time again. It's because they follow, you can't really, yeah, it's hard to sort of mesh with how people want their career to run. Mark is crying. Good answer. No, he wasn't crying.
And maybe, I don't know, wrapping it up, at least one question One selfish question in my case: how does philosophy help you in all that? Like, why, in addition to your personal interest in philosophy, but you signed up because maybe you thought, I don't know, does it? In what way does philosophy help shape your thought?
Yeah, so I have a disappointingly simple view of what philosophy means to me. So I'm very sorry, Mr. Decaf Quest.
No, I
Uh,
mean,
for-
it's equally.
Yeah,
I mean, I
it's
would agree with you, but yeah.
it's for me, it's putting thought into what are patterns of how things might work. It's about thinking things through. It's about not jumping to conclusions, and it's also about staying away from just guesswork, and enjoying that process of finding patterns and thinking things through. And some of those principles that I shared in the presentation, whether it's about, instead of following trends, looking for conflicting trends, which you leapt upon immediately for taking us down a very dark philosophical route. But those kinds of views on how the world works in order to create something new that might work in that world that is changing, that's philosophy for me. It's the same as that it's, even though it might look from the outside like consulting work or marketing work, it is also deeply creative. When I first switched into this space, because I came out of a pretty hardcore engineering job to do this kind of work, a lot of my people in my network and friends, personal friends, said, wow, that's quite a leap. And I said, what do you mean it's quite a leap? I'm still solving riddles. I'm trying to solve puzzles thrown at me every day. I mean, it used to be like more of a, I don't know, an engineering trouble of, can we make it? Can we make it at the right price? Is it going to be strong enough? Is it going to be beautiful to look at? And now it's still a puzzle. It's, will people want to buy that, or will they want to buy a slightly different version, which may be a little more expensive to make? But then, so it's just puzzles. It's solving riddles, and I love that. It's so much nicer than just being told what to do. So there's again, long answer, but there is something deeply, it's not necessarily cerebral, as in you just want to think. There's also deep beauty. I mean, I have behind me a shelf of the books that really affected me in my thinking. And well, one of them is The Clock of the Long Now, with the pace layering that I showed, which is such a deep philosophy book. I mean, the book was written by a group of engineers, one in particular, Stuart Brand. They gave themselves, like, spare me 30 seconds to explain what the book is about. They gave themselves the task in the late 80s to create a clock, like a clock that tells the time, that would run for 10,000 years. And the only thing it needed to show was when 1 year had passed. They thought that would be like a massive engineering problem. Technically, not a problem at all. They figure out, like, in no time. What it is a societal problem. How do you create a device that, first of all, can survive that period of time without being destroyed by wars or by people who don't think or don't understand what it is? How do you ensure that people who might grow up through a completely different culture 5,000 years from now see it and understand what it is and how to read the time? It gives you the deepest philosophical problems that have to do with the passage of time and deep time over generations, as you could probably imagine. Another absolutely sort of earth-shattering one for me was the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Persig, on what quality really means through a romantic view of the wholeness, the stance, the total of things, beauty, and on the other side, the more rational classic view, a collection of ideas, things that have function, all ladder up to the same thing. I mean, Mahmoud, that is philosophy through and through. And it's all about doing something new. How was that as a pitch?
That's actually much better than many an academic philosophy professor. And in light of that, I think this is where the follow-up question from Mark comes in. Does owning a business make you a philosopher?
Wow. Does owning a business make you a philosopher? What I've noticed is when I became an entrepreneur, I was first, it's almost like Entrepreneur Anonymous, where I would say, oh, no, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm just sort of playing. That's just because I'm doing something really fun and I'm trying to build a business around it. When I realized I was really an entrepreneur, when we had people on the payroll, we had bills to pay, when we had to make sure money was coming in, customers, what I realized was there were very few people who understood the issues we had, what being an entrepreneur really implies. And I realized it's something you can only discuss with other entrepreneurs, no matter how big or small. If you talk with people who have not faced the decision, will I go meet that promising customer who might put a big project order with us, or will I go to my son's 7th birthday party? Then of course you always choose to go to the business meeting, because your son will have an 8th birthday party next year, which you can attend maybe, whereas that business opportunity might disappear overnight. And those kinds of considerations are tough on your kid, but then again, hey, they always know their present will probably be bigger when they come back. But going to Mark's question specifically is, at least the entrepreneurs I've engaged with a lot outside of my own business, because I had my own business partners with who you're always having conversations around how to run the business, how. The ones I felt very attracted to were continuously dealing with questions to answer, for which there were no scripted answers, but it was always in the now, which required that, I guess what I mentioned before in another context, was just thinking things through. Is there any pattern I can spot here which I can latch onto to make my decisions easier? So I think if you're going into business as an entrepreneur, to be an entrepreneur, to create a business that can find customers, get them to pay for a service, and end the year with a profit and happy employees. I'm also thinking, if you're not a philosopher, if you do not enjoy thinking things through, how on earth are you going to do it? I don't know. So I guess, Mark, the answer from my point of view is yes. If you take the somewhat simpler view of what a philosopher really does, which is just think like this, usually outside of work. I mean, when you're done doing all the stuff, the menial shit you need to deal with throughout the day, and so finally sort of you've had your dinner and sort of sitting back and thinking, how do we do X, Y, Z? Because no one's done it before, no one's told you. You have to think it through in an enjoyable way, by the way. This has nothing to do with stress all the time. This is just sort of thinking about your business, how to make it work, how to make it even more enjoyable.
And nothing. Yeah,
Imposter
maybe
syndrome sounds like Plato. Yeah.
yeah, philosophy and making decisions under certainty. Yeah, and this is uncertainty is basically in the subtitle of Costas' talk. Now Vietnamese, interesting. Not elitists at all. Not 10 stars. Not 10 Michelin stars. Okay.
No, was
You
it
didn't
on
pay like
St.
500
John's Road
euros
or something? Yeah.
So maybe one more thing, because you already mentioned 2 books, maybe one other book that has influenced you, and maybe some, I don't know, suggestions in general, like I don't know, like in general, a few things, whatever, in addition to the book, for the people like us who want to follow suit one day.
Yeah. That's interesting. Which ones? I'm just looking at this little list behind me. So what I have a massive soft spot for, again, it's just because it's actually, if I tilt the screen a little bit, you'll see in this bookcase, I'll put it in the middle of the screen, there is a Lego model of an Apollo rocket. So no, it's not anti-fragile. No, but if you either say watch the movie The Right Stuff, or you read the book it was based on, which is this one. It's called Man on the Moon. It's basically it's a pretty thick book, which it is riveting stuff about what this relatively small group of people at what was then NASA put themselves through to create the machine that became the machine that would take a person to the moon. And the selfless sacrifice to the greater good of progress that is described in that book, I found mind-boggling, because effectively, I mean, if you haven't really ever thought about it, if you look at a moon rocket, the Apollo rocket, or even the one that they just trialed recently, it's effectively a huge bomb with a tiny little caravan on top. And strapping yourself into that and saying, like this thing, and let's pray it goes well. The early, again, astronauts, and this no longer exists. That's the beauty, but also the sadness of this is, if you would have a modern version of, let's say, the Homo Universalis, like Leonardo da Vinci, these astronauts, each and every one of them, were one of those characters, because they would literally spend the day flying at supersonic speeds, trialing engineering solutions. And then in the evening, they would sit down and do their calculations and work with the manufacturer to see how they could improve it. So that attitude is about as visceral as I have ever come across when it comes to doing new things, and knowing that it might actually kill you tomorrow, but you are so eager. It's like the gentleman jumping off the Eiffel Tower, putting yourself in danger's way because you know if it works, there's a lot to gain, not just personally, but for everyone. I just find that admirable, and it's something I don't think could be done again. I think as a society, we've moved to a place where those kinds of ridiculous risks no longer exist. I mean, as a parallel to this, it's really funny. So this is Man on the Moon. I have another one, which is actually a lot, you can imagine why it's funnier, is this, the Soviet space program, which of course had a very different ending. But it shows similar attitudes, like absolutely jaw-dropping solutions, completely insane, just to see if it might work. And funnily enough, the Soviets, of course, were way ahead of the Americans in the beginning, because they just had way smarter and more radical engineering. But there you could see what got in the way was politics. It was a much stronger pressure from, let's say, the Politburo to make things work than there was from, let's say, the NASA top, who actually had to defend continuing for a very long time because, yeah, Kennedy was dead. So if the whole moon program would have been canceled, it could have been done without too much noise. So, sorry, that's a long answer to your question again, Mahmoud, but yeah.
Well, yeah, that's very interesting indeed. And maybe, I don't know if there's any final question, or if not, final thoughts. Any other question?
Costas, let me know if you find the way to gap the difference.
Oh, trust me, you will know. The world will know when I find a way to do that. I'm going to be really noisy about it, but it's just not there yet. But yeah. Yeah, thank you. This has been really enjoyable to just sort of vent. So it's quite cathartic, actually.
It's been great, man.
Yeah, thank you for staying with me to the very end.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't know, any final remarks on your end, Costas? Any other thing you'd like that?
I realize that, of course, I come from a very niche, let's say, space, as in it's just quite a niche little sort of specialism to be in. But I do hope there are plenty parallels for you to just connect to whatever you're doing. Because at the core, it's about doing new things, which is a genuine human thing to do across so many facets of life. And yeah, just thinking it through a little, and not being naive nor stupid when you do it, because you don't need to. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. This
Yeah.
has been really nice. So thank you for agreeing to do this. And
No,
yeah,
with pleasure. With pleasure.
thank you
Guys,
everyone for
and thank you also
joining.
for the kind words appearing in the chat. Yeah, and have a fantastic evening, everyone.
Yeah. Have a good day. Good night, everyone. Thank you for
Yeah,
joining.
and also anyone on the call, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Just don't trust anything I say there, if you're not already, or if we're not already connected through some other channel. Then
Let me, I'll share the link now, and I'll put it on at least not your LinkedIn, your Grumpy Innovator, is it?
Yeah, but also LinkedIn profile's fine too.
Okay.
Whatever is easiest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey guys, have a nice evening there. I'll check out.
Thank
now.
you
It's
very
been,
much, everyone.
Nice speaking to you.
Have a good
Bye.
day. Cheers.